The key still sticks. Brian jiggled it in the old brass lock, same as he did when he was 12, hoping the door wouldn't creak loud enough to wake his dad during one of those graveyard shift naps. Now 37, he was back, not to visit, not to celebrate, not even to mourn properly. The service was done. The cold ham had been picked clean. The casseroles were stacked in Tupperware towers in the fridge. And everyone who had come to whisper clichés and hug too long had returned to their own lives. His mother, dry-eyed, had gone to bed early last night, leaving a trail of unopened sympathy cards on the kitchen counter. Brian stood alone in the entryway now, listening to the silence press against his ribs. Outside, the garage light buzzed. That amber bulb above the side door, it never turned off. His father insisted it stay lit, even in daylight. "So you can find your way back if you're ever out too long," he'd said once, almost muttering. And it stuck with Brian, like the scent of motor oil in his skin, like the feel of steel in cold hands. He walked through the house without turning on any lights. Everything was just as he remembered. The recliner, worn where his dad's shoulders leaned. The TV remote wrapped in masking tape. A faded photo of the two of them at Wrigley, Brian's face beaming, his father's half-shadowed in the sun. But it was the garage that called. He paused at the door leading to it. The old metal handle was cool, familiar. The smell seeped through the cracks, dust, grease, and the metallic bite of rust. He pushed it open. The fluorescent light overhead flickered to life, buzzing in protest. The space looked like it had been preserved in amber. Tools still hung on pegboards, outlines drawn around each wrench and socket to mark where they belong. An oil-stained rag sat crumpled on the workbench. And then, the shoebox. It sat tucked behind a stack of old Sports Illustrateds from the late 80s. The corner was dented. Dust coated the top. And on the lid, in his father's rigid handwriting. "Not for Brian." He hesitated. Part of him wanted to shove it back. Leave it there, untouched, a relic meant to stay buried. But another part, the boy who had waited for years for some kind of proof that his father had actually felt something, reached out. Inside were cassette tapes. 10 of them. Each one dated. Each labeled in the same sharp script. March 5, 1992. April 14, 1993. August 9, 1994. And so on. The last one was dated just 6 months ago. He stared at them, heart pacing. His fingers shook slightly as he lifted the top tape, slipped it into the old yellow Walkman they used to take on fishing trips. The foam on the headphones had all but disintegrated. Still, he pressed play. A click. A long silence. Then, "If you're hearing this, it means I'm gone, or you went snooping. Maybe both. I never wanted you to hear these, but part of me hoped you would. So here goes. My name is Jack. I'm your father. I guess that's how I should start." Brian didn't realize he was sitting until his knees hit the cold concrete. The voice was grainy but unmistakable. Jack Morgan, in his own words. A man who built his life out of silence and socket wrenches. And now, he was talking. "I don't know how to say things. Never did. I fix things. That's what I'm good at. Your mother always said I love and maintenance. Keep the car running. Keep the lights on. Keep the kid out of trouble. But that don't mean I didn't feel it." Brian closed his eyes. The garage seemed smaller now. Or maybe he was shrinking into the boy he used to be, the one who waited on the back steps with his glove on, watching his dad through the kitchen window, hoping he'd come out and toss the ball around. But Jack never did. Instead, he tightened bolts. Changed spark plugs. Cleaned carburetors. "You remember the summer you broke your arm? I took the week off, not 'cause I had the time. I didn't. We were short-staffed, and it was hell at the plant. But you needed someone to sign the cast. So I did. That purple Sharpie, it squeaked like hell on the fiberglass." Brian almost laughed. He remembered that cast. It had been covered in stupid jokes and misspelled names. But dead center, in bold letters, was one word. Pop. The tape clicked. End of side A. He stared at the Walkman, thumb hovering. He flipped the tape and pressed play. I was in Vietnam. You knew that. But you didn't know what I did there. I never told your mother either. I drove a truck. Supply runs mostly. Until I didn't. There was one night. Bad road. Ambush. I won't tell you the details, some things are better buried. But I got out. My buddy didn't. The voice cracked, just slightly. His name was Benny. From Evansville. Funny guy. Loved the Cubs. We made a pact. Whoever got home first would take the other's mom to church every Sunday. I kept that promise for 2 years. Brian's jaw tightened. He had never heard his father speak like this. Never this raw, never this real. I got this guilt. Comes in waves. Still does. That's why I stayed in the garage. Tools don't ask questions. Engines don't care if you're broken. The words sank into Brian like oil into concrete. I was scared of being a bad dad. I know I was. I didn't say the things I should have. But I hope. God, I hope changing your oil was enough. The tape whirred to a stop. Brian sat there a long time. He didn't cry. Not yet. But for the first time, he looked around the garage not as a room full of junk, but as a kind of shrine, a cathedral of quiet love built from socket sets and solvent. The shoebox still held 9 more tapes. 9 more stories. 9 more chances to hear the man who had never said, I love you, finally say everything else. The second tape was labeled April 14th, 1993. Spring tune-up. Brian slid it into the Walkman. It hissed a little louder than the first, like it had been left too long in the cold. He adjusted the volume, but not too loud. Didn't want to miss the creak of his father's chair, the sound of breath before words. Click. April now. Cold's breaking. Daffodils are coming in crooked. You used to call them banana flowers. Thought that was cute. Never corrected you. A soft rustle. Paper, maybe? Or Jack adjusting something on the workbench. Took the mower apart today. Blade was dull. I taught you that last year, how to check for balance. You caught on quick. I was proud of that. Didn't say it though. Figured you knew. Brian felt his chest tighten. He could still see the grass-stained screwdriver in his 10-year-old hands. The way his father had grunted approval, not a word, just a satisfied noise. At the time, it felt like praise. Now, he wondered what more might have been there, left unsaid. You asked me once why I keep everything. Tools, receipts, spark plugs that don't fit anything anymore. I told you, just in case. But that wasn't the truth. I keep things because I lose people. I hold on to the things they touch. The rest fades. Silence. Then a deep sigh. Your mom doesn't get it. She calls it hoarding. Maybe she's right. But every wrench in that garage reminds me I made something work once. Even if it was just a damn lawnmower. Brian stood, slowly. His knees ached. He wandered over to the wall, fingers brushing over the outlines of tools still hanging in place. His father's world, drawn in graphite and sweat. I was thinking today about that time you scraped up your bike on Mrs. Donnelly's curb. You limped in, bloody elbow, red knees, tears streaming. You looked so small, I forgot to be tough. I just picked you up. Held you. One of the only times I ever did. You probably don't even remember. He did. Brian swallowed. It had been a blur of pain and confusion, but he remembered his father's arms, how solid they felt. How his shirt smelled like cigarettes and grease. How he'd cried harder once he was held, not less. Because it had felt safe. I thought I'd have more time. To tell you things. Show you. But life doesn't wait. It just takes. Then it keeps taking. Brian hit pause. He didn't want to rush it. He walked to the far corner of the garage where the fishing rods were still stored, the reels tangled, the lines dry and curling like old veins. He used to hate fishing. Sitting for hours in the heat, holding a stick, watching for a bobber that never moved. But now he'd give anything for one more Saturday like that. He clicked play. Your mother had a miscarriage before you. We don't talk about it. She cried for weeks. I didn't know how to help. So I built shelves in the garage. It was the only thing I could do without breaking apart. Brian leaned against the wall. The air felt heavier. That child would have been your sister. We were gonna name her Anna. I only said it out loud once. Then never again. But I thought you should know. Maybe that's why I held on too tight, or not tight enough. The voice drifted off. You asked once why I never came to your plays. God, I hated myself for that. I'd sit in the truck outside, engine running, couldn't bring myself to go in. The idea of clapping at the wrong time, sitting in the wrong row. I don't know. Fear, maybe. Or shame. Not at you, never at you. Just me? The tape clicked off. Brian stood in the dim garage, cassette still spinning in the Walkman like it didn't want to stop. Like it had more to say. Outside, the streetlights buzzed to life. The amber glow from above the garage door spilled down like honey. He sat again on the cold concrete, knees to chest, and thought about Anna, about a sister he never knew, a girl who might have taught him how to cry when their dad wouldn't. Then he reached into the shoebox and pulled out the next tape. August 9th, 1994. The oil change. Letting this one wait felt wrong. The memory was sharp. His first solo oil change. He remembered the way his dad had stood back, arms crossed, letting him work, silent the whole time, until Brian tightened the drain plug too hard and it snapped. Jack didn't yell. Just nodded, fetched a new one from the drawer, and said, "You'll remember next time." That had been the first moment Brian realized love wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was just standing close while someone failed. He pressed play. You cursed under your breath when that bolt broke. I pretended not to hear. You were so mad at yourself, but I was proud. You didn't ask for help. You tried. That's what counts, son. That's always what counts. Brian leaned back against the workbench, eyes burning. I didn't say it then. I should have. I should have said good job. I should have said I'm proud. I am proud. Of the way you take care of things. Of the way you always keep trying. The voice faltered. God, I wish I'd said that more. The tape hissed into silence. Brian didn't stop it. He let the hum roll over him. Let the quiet fill every corner. And in that moment, sitting in the center of his father's quiet kingdom of bolts and bearings, he whispered, I heard you, Dad. The third tape had no title. Just a date. December 24th, 1995. Brian sat cross-legged now, a folded shop towel under him to ward off the concrete chill. It was Christmas Eve in that recording, just like it had been then, cold, gray, silent. He remembered that year vividly, the tree too small, the gifts sparse, his dad's mood brittle as an icicle. He'd asked for a Game Boy. Got socks and a compass instead. Click. It's Christmas Eve. You're asleep. At least I think you are. I can hear your radio through the wall, playing that damn Mariah Carey song again. A tired chuckle. You're 12 now. Too old to believe in Santa, too young to understand why there's no magic in this house tonight. Brian leaned back, resting his head against the garage wall. I tried to fix the furnace this morning. You probably didn't notice, it's running now. But it almost wasn't. I spent 3 hours on my back under the house, in mud and freezing pipes. Cut my hand on a rusted bracket. Whole damn thing was bleeding by the time I got it working. Brian didn't know that. He remembered it being cold. He remembered his dad being distant. But not the bleeding. Not the crawl space. Not the sacrifice. You didn't say thanks. You weren't supposed to. I just wanted you to be warm. A pause. Then, your mom gave me a book this year. Something about how to talk to kids. I read 2 pages. I felt like a stranger in my own home. The truth is, I don't know how to speak in feelings. I only know how to speak in actions. The tape whirred. I love you, you know. Even if I never said it. Even if I never say it. I do. Brian's breath hitched. He'd waited 37 years to hear those words. And they came on a dusty tape from a Christmas long buried. I bought the compass because I wanted you to always know where home is. Even if you left. Even if we argued. I figured if you ever got lost, you'd know how to get back to me. Brian opened the drawer near the workbench. It stuck halfway, swollen from years of moisture. He yanked it gently, and inside, there it was. The old compass. Still ticking. Still pointing. He cradled it in his palm, small and silver, the face scratched but intact. He had thrown it in this drawer the day he got it. He hadn't touched it since. But now, it felt holy. I never meant to make you feel small. Or unwanted. I was scared of turning you into me. I thought if I held you too close, you'd carry my weight. So I stayed back. I thought that was love. Maybe I was wrong. Brian set the compass on the bench. He didn't want to hold it. Not yet. The tape wound on. You went to bed tonight mad because there weren't many gifts. I get that. I really do. I wish I could give you more. Not things, time. Patience. Pride. But all I had were tools and the quiet. So I gave you that. I hope someday you'll see it wasn't nothing. Brian pressed his hand to his chest, just above his sternum, where something deep and aching stirred. Merry Christmas, kid. I wish I was better at this. But I'm trying. I swear I'm trying. Click. End of tape. Brian didn't move. He didn't cry either. His father's words were knives. They were stitches. Painful, yes, but closing something long open. He reached back into the shoebox. His fingers found the next cassette. June 3, 1997. The day you didn't graduate. Brian flinched. He almost didn't listen. Almost threw it aside. That was the year he flunked sophomore English and got held back. His friends walked in caps and gowns while he stayed home, locked in his room, waiting for a punishment that never came. He pressed play anyway. You stayed in your room all day. I wanted to knock. I stood outside your door for 20 minutes, hand raised. But I didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound like a lecture. Brian blinked, eyes stinging. I wasn't mad. I was ashamed. Not of you. Of me. That I hadn't seen it coming. That I hadn't been paying attention. A pause. Your mom said I should yell, make it a lesson. But I remember failing my driver's test when I was 16. My old man didn't say a word. Just walked outside and took apart the carburetor for the third time that week. I hated him for that. Hated that silence. I didn't want you to hate me the same way. Another pause. So I didn't yell. I just went to the garage and changed the oil on the Impala. Brian felt like the air had been knocked out of him. He remembered that. He'd peeked out the window and seen his father bent under the hood, shoulders tight. He had mistaken it for indifference. Now he knew better. I told myself, maybe he'll come help. Maybe he'll bring a socket wrench and stand beside me again like he used to. But you didn't. And I get it. I do. Brian gritted his teeth. He hadn't come out. He'd stayed hidden, ashamed of failing, afraid of the judgment. But it had never come. That night, I left the garage light on. Thought maybe you'd see it. Maybe you'd come out. You didn't. That's okay. I just hope you knew it meant the door was open. Brian looked up at the bulb. Still lit. Still buzzing faintly in the quiet. He had thought that light was just habit. A quirk. But maybe it had always been a signal. A lighthouse. Next year you passed everything. You didn't need me. But I was proud. Just wanted you to know. Click. Brian exhaled. He looked around the garage now, not just with memory, but with understanding. Every tool hung straight. Every rag folded. Every can labeled. It had been a place of order for a man who lived with internal chaos. And now it was a confessional. A lifeline. A love letter written in socket wrenches and silence. He reached into the box. 4 tapes remained, each one heavier than the last. He wasn't sure he could take another tonight. But his hand moved anyway. The next cassette had a crack along its spine. The label had peeled, half lifted from the plastic, but the date was still there. Barely. October 2nd, 2000. The day you left. Brian knew exactly what this one was. It was the day he threw his duffel bag in the back of his rusted Camry and told his parents he was heading west. No plan, no job, just escape. 22 years old, all anger and elbows. His mom had cried quietly at the sink. His father didn't come out of the garage. Brian remembered hating him for that. Click. I watched you pull out of the driveway through the crack in the garage door. Didn't think you saw me. You didn't. That's okay. You were mad. I get that. A pause. A long breath. You had your reasons. I wasn't easy to live with. Too quiet. Too cold. You wanted heat, and all I gave you was rules and reminders. But God, Brian, I was scared. Brian sat very still. Scared that if I held on, I'd break you. And scared that if I let go, you'd never come back. There was a rattle of tools in the background, like Jack had picked one up mid-thought, forgot it, and set it back down. You were so much braver than me. I never left this town. Never wanted to. Everything I built right here. But you went chasing the horizon like it owed you something. And I envied that. I still do. Brian leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the grease-stained floor. He remembered the drive out of town. How the cornfields blurred. How his stomach ached for hours after. I wanted to tell you I was proud. I wanted to tell you that I believed in you. But I didn't. I just stood here. Watched your taillights disappear. Then I took your baseball glove and put it back on the shelf, even though you'd left it behind on purpose. Brian's breath caught. He remembered tossing that glove on the lawn, hoping someone would take it, or his father would at least notice. It's still there. Top shelf, right side, behind the brake cleaner. Hasn't moved in 15 years. Brian turned slowly. Top shelf, right side. He rose, walked to it, stood on a milk crate. And there it was. The same Wilson A2000. Laces still cracked, leather softened by time. He held it in his hands like a relic. I kept it because it still smelled like you. Sun and leather and grass. Kept it because maybe, if you came back, you'd want it again. Brian cradled it. His fingers slid into the pocket, muscle memory clicking into place. The first year you were gone, I left the porch light on every night. Your mom said it was wasting electricity. I told her I liked the way it looked. That was a lie. I left it on because I thought maybe you'd drive back, see it, and know we were still waiting. Brian wiped his eyes, hand shaking slightly. I don't know if I was a good dad. I tried. I swear to God I tried. But sometimes I think I was just a man in the garage, hoping his son would understand love written in silence. The tape hissed. No click. No clean end. Just static that stretched on too long. He let it run. Let the empty sound fill the room. He couldn't stand the quiet anymore. Eventually, the Walkman stopped. Brian stayed where he was. Glove in hand. He hadn't seen his father again for almost 4 years after that day. And when he had, it had been at his mother's request, after a surgery gone wrong. Jack had barely spoken during that visit. They watched a Cubs game. Jack had kept muttering about the bullpen. Not one word about the lost years. Now he wondered if the words had been waiting here all along. The next tape was thicker. A 90-minute cassette. May 18, 2006, the fight. Brian stared at it. He almost skipped it. Because he knew what it was. The worst night of their lives. The night they yelled so loud the neighbors called the cops. The night Brian said, "You were never a father to me." And Jack slammed the door so hard it splintered the frame. But the tape was here. So Jack had remembered it too. Brian clicked it into the player. Press play. You called me a coward. A silence. You said I hid in this garage because I didn't know how to be a man. And you were right. Brian's throat closed. He didn't expect that. I didn't know how to be a man. I only knew how to be a survivor. A provider. I gave you food, heat, a house. But I didn't know how to give you me. Not the broken parts. Not the scared parts. A sharp inhale. Almost a sob, swallowed too quickly. When you said I wasn't a father, I believed you. Still do some days. Brian shook his head. No, he whispered. Don't say that. I wanted to break something that night. My hands were shaking. Not from anger, from failure. Because I realized all those years I thought I was protecting you, I was really protecting myself. The voice got quieter. You asked why I never hugged you. I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't. My old man never touched me unless he was drunk or angry. So I guess I thought distance was respect. That hugs would make you soft. That words were wasted on strong boys. A click in the background. Maybe Jack pacing. Maybe lighting a cigarette. You walked out again that night. Said you didn't know if you'd ever come back. And I believed you. But I left the garage light on anyway. Brian bowed his head. That light? Always that damn light. You came back 3 Christmases later. Didn't say why. Just showed up with beer and a box of brake pads. We changed out the rotors on your mom's car and never mentioned the fight. I think that was our way of saying sorry. It was. It always was. You didn't know it, but I kept that night's tape separate from the others. Thought maybe someday I'd throw it away. Burn it. But I didn't. Because pain means you care. And I cared. More than I ever said. Brian pressed pause. He needed a minute. The old furnace rattled through the walls like a heartbeat. He looked around the garage, at the outlines on the pegboard, the half-drunk can of Dr. Pepper from who knows when, the calendar still frozen in last July. He remembered the fight. Every word. Every silence after. But he didn't remember the man on the tape. Not like this. Not this open. This wounded. This willing to bleed in cassette form. He unpaused. I don't know what kind of father leaves his son guessing his whole life. But I want you to know now, I see you. I'm proud of who you are. And I'm sorry I didn't say that when it mattered most. Brian sat back, mouth pressed shut. Those words, he'd imagined them 1,000 times. Heard them in dreams. Whispered them to himself during long, drunk nights in San Diego or Chicago or wherever he'd run off to. But now they were real. On tape. And they were enough to crack something in him wide open. Click. The tape ended. He didn't move for a long time. When he did, he looked at the shoebox. 2 tapes left. And he was almost afraid of what they held. The second-to-last tape was labeled in thicker ink, like Jack had pressed the pen harder. Or maybe his hand was shaking. March 2nd, 2017. The check engine light. Brian furrowed his brow. That date meant something. Yes, his mother had called him that night. His father had collapsed at the gas station after filling up the truck. Mild heart attack, she said. Nothing fatal, just a warning. As if death sent postcards before arriving. Brian had driven through the night from Cleveland, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles ached. He never forgot the hum of the highway, the red warning light glowing on his own dashboard, check engine. He ignored it. He'd ignored a lot of things. He pushed the tape in. The familiar click. The long pause. They say it wasn't major. But I felt it. In my arms. My chest. My teeth, for Christ's sake. Pain like someone reached inside and gave my heart a good twist. A cough. Weak, dry. Throat clearing. A rustle of fabric. Your mom made me throw out all the bacon. Said I was gonna eat myself into an early grave. I told her, if I'm going with grease in my veins. She didn't laugh. Brian smiled softly, despite himself. That sounded like him. You came home. You always do. even when I don't deserve it. You sat next to me in the hospital and pretended not to see the four. Talked about the Cubs like we were just killing time in the garage. Brian closed his eyes. He remembered sitting at his father's bedside, talking about the bullpen. Neither of them mentioned the wires, or the EKG monitor, or the way Jack's lips were pale and trembling. I wanted to say something that night. Really say it. But I didn't know how. So I made a joke. You laughed. That was enough for me. There was a pause. A faint hum of a radio in the background, muffled. Brian recognized it. It was the old boombox mounted to the garage shelf. FM 93.5. Classic rock and farm reports. Still worked. Somehow. You changed the oil in the truck before you left. I saw you out the window. Thought about coming down to help, but I didn't. Watching you was enough. Brian remembered that too. Crawling under the Silverado with freezing hands, trying to find a socket that wasn't stripped. His dad had been watching? You're a better man than I ever was. You lead with your heart. Even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. Brian felt his mouth twitch. He wasn't sure if it was a smile or something closer to grief. I left the garage light on when you pulled out. Same as always. A deep breath. A sigh. I don't think I've got many more tapes in me. Talking like this, it drains me. But I want you to know something, Brian. The tape cracked slightly. Maybe the mic had shifted, or Jack leaned closer. I always thought I had time. That one day, I'd find the words, say them to your face. But time isn't a guarantee. It's a favor. Brian's throat tightened. So if I go before I get to say it properly, if you're hearing this without me there, just know, I loved you with everything I had. Even if it didn't sound like it. Even if it didn't look like it. It was there. In every bolt I tightened on your bike. Every light I left on. Every damn oil change. The voice wavered. And I'm sorry for the times I made you wonder. Click. No side B this time. Just silence. Brian sat for a long time, the Walkman resting in his palm like a relic. The garage smelled like it always did, metal, dust, old sweat, and gasoline. But tonight, it also smelled like memory. Like presence. Like something once sealed now opened. There was only one tape left. He reached into the box, hesitated, then pulled it out. It was unmarked. No date. No title. Just the tape. Black plastic, blank label. He slid it in. Click. No rustle this time. No throat clearing. Just breath. Then, hey kid. A pause. If you're listening to this, it means the old man finally punched his clock. Brian felt something in his stomach sink slowly, like an anchor. I didn't know how to end these. I made 10 of them. 10 chances to get it right. I don't know if I did. But I want this last one to be clear. The sound of the garage door lifting in the background, faint, automatic. Maybe a car had pulled in while he recorded it. Maybe he'd opened it for fresh air. You were the best thing I ever built. I didn't understand how to raise a son, but I watched you grow into something I couldn't have imagined. Not a copy of me. Better. Kinder. Brian clenched his fists, eyes wet, silent. I hope someday you have a kid of your own. And I hope you tell them everything I couldn't. Hug them too long. Talk too much. Love too loud. A breath. But when you change their oil, I hope they know what that means too. Brian broke. Shoulders shaking. No sobs, just tears falling, hot and relentless, onto the floor of the garage. The same floor he'd swept 100 times, the same floor his father had paced when words failed him. Leave the light on once in a while, will you? Click. End of everything. Brian sat in the stillness. No tape. No noise. Just the hum of the garage light, buzzing faintly overhead, casting its dull amber glow. He looked around. Tools. Rags. The glove. The compass. Relics of a man who'd built his love in silence and steel. And now, for the first time in his life, Brian felt full. Not fixed. Not healed. But full. He stood slowly, walked to the workbench, and placed the last tape back in the box. Then he turned, walked to the door, and reached up to the switch. The garage light stayed on. The garage didn't feel cold anymore. Not warm, exactly. But no longer just a place where time stood still. Brian stood there, fingers still resting near the switch, the cassette box closed beside him like a finished book. He thought about taking it into the house, locking it away in a drawer. Maybe even digitizing the tapes, preserving his father's voice in the cloud like some kind of reluctant ghost. But no. They belonged here. In the garage. He set the box down carefully on the bench, nudging aside a cracked coffee mug that still had dried paint in the bottom. The mug read, "World's okayest dad." A gag gift from a childhood Christmas, bought at a gas station gift rack. He never remembered if his dad had laughed. Now he knew he had. Brian wiped his nose with the edge of his sleeve and turned to the cabinets beneath the workbench. He crouched, pulling open drawers, metal squealing as rusted tracks protested. Inside, rolls of duct tape, an unopened oil filter, spark plugs still in their blister packs. Then, a brown paper bag, folded at the top. He pulled it out slowly. Heavy. The kind of bag you only put a bottle in. Inside, tucked between bald paper towel and old receipts, was a bottle of Glenlivet 18. Unopened. And a note, folded tight and yellowing with age. For Brian. When the job is done. He let out a soft, broken laugh. The sound surprised him. Of course. His father had never drunk the good stuff. Jack kept a 6-pack of Schlitz in the garage fridge, and maybe a dusty bottle of Canadian Mist in the pantry. But this was expensive. Deliberate. It hadn't been bought for drinking. It had been bought for meaning. Brian grabbed 2 small mason jars from the shelf, old jelly jars, long ago washed and saved, and poured 2 fingers of the scotch into each. He hesitated, then set one on the bench. Across from where he now sat. He raised his own. "Here's to you, Pop," he said, voice hoarse. "You finally said it." He took a slow sip. It burned. Then bloomed. He leaned back, staring up at the ceiling, following the familiar rust patterns like constellations. The garage door opener hung from its bracket like a sleeping beast. Dust floated in the beam of the single bare bulb. Everything had changed. And nothing had. He finished the glass slowly. Then he stood. And began to work. He started with the shelves. Cleared out old cans of half-dried paint, separated nails from screws, tossed anything that was truly broken. He wiped down the bench, sorted the sockets, even oiled the hinges on the vice grip. He swept. Twice. It felt right. Ritualistic. The garage had always been a temple. He just hadn't realized what it was worshipping until now. When he got to the pegboard, he reached for a loose crescent wrench and hesitated. The outline of it had long since faded. Its absence left no mark. He hung it anyway. And then something caught his eye. Taped to the back of the shelf, near where the old boombox sat, was a photo. It had curled at the edges, yellowed in the corners. Brian pulled it loose gently. It was him. Age 6, maybe 7. Holding up a spark plug like it was a gold medal, missing his front teeth, grinning at the camera. His father stood behind him, not looking at the lens, but at Brian. And smiling. Just barely. Just enough. On the back, scrawled in faint blue ink. First plug. Didn't strip it. Brian held it for a long time. Then pinned it to the board with a thumbtack, right in the center, next to the torque wrenches. He stepped back. Looked at it. It felt like the garage itself had exhaled. Later, as dusk settled over the Indiana cul-de-sac, the garage door stood open, lights spilling out into the driveway like warmth. Neighbors passed slowly in the growing dark. A couple of them waved. One older man, Mr. Feldman from next door, lingered for a moment on the sidewalk. Brian caught his eye. Nodded. Feldman returned it. then pointed at the open garage. Haven't seen that door up since, hell. Since the Colts beat the Patriots in '09. Brian half smiled. Figured it was time. The old man squinted at him, something knowing in his expression. Good light in there. Brian turned his head toward it. Yeah. Always was. Mr. Feldman gave one more nod and shuffled off. Brian stood alone for a while, watching the streets soak into blue shadow. The breeze carried the scent of cut grass and the faintest memory of motor oil. He stepped back inside, pulled the chain to shut the garage door. The motor groaned, then rolled the heavy panel down. The light stayed on. One more job. He found the small black tackle box in the corner, where his dad had kept fuses and electrical tape. Beneath it, curled at the bottom, was the box of spare bulbs. He replaced the one above the bench first. Then the one in the rafters. Then, finally, the porch bulb, amber and warm, humming softly in the quiet. He didn't shut it off. Wouldn't. Not tonight. Not ever, maybe. Inside the house, the air felt hollow. Brian paused in the doorway between the kitchen and the hall, listening for echoes that would never return. His mother had left a note before heading to stay with her sister in Muncie. Take your time with it. He would have wanted that. Mom. There was something else below it, scrawled as if added later. Different pen. Lighter hand. He was proud of you. Even when he couldn't say it. Brian took the note with him back to the garage. He pinned it beside the photo. Then he stood there, in the amber glow, in the quiet kingdom of a man who never said, I love you, out loud, but built it in wood and wire and tape. Brian looked at the shoebox. The tapes were all back in place. He closed the lid. Tomorrow, he'd start on the attic. Go through the papers. Maybe sort the photos. But tonight the garage was enough. Tonight he'd found what he didn't know he'd been looking for. Not forgiveness. Not closure. But a voice. And the sound of it finally reaching him across the long, quiet years. He walked to the switch by the door, hand resting there for a moment. Then he left the garage and shut the door behind him. The light stayed on. Brian didn't sleep that night. He lay on the old twin bed in his childhood room, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars still faintly clinging to the ceiling. He'd forgotten they were even there. Some had peeled off, leaving behind faint ghost rings in the shape of constellations he couldn't name. Outside the window, the garage light hummed. And inside his head, Jack's voice echoed, not in full sentences anymore, but in fragments. Half-thoughts. Feelings. You were the best thing I ever built. Leave the light on once in a while. I love and maintenance. He turned over. Pulled the old quilt tighter across his chest. Sleep wouldn't come. Not when a lifetime of silence had just been broken. By morning, the fog had rolled in thick, settling like breath on the windows. Brian padded barefoot into the kitchen, made coffee he didn't drink, stared at the refrigerator covered in fading magnets, car service shops, pizza coupons, and a dog-shaped thermometer that hadn't worked in years. The silence in the house wasn't just absence. It was presence, too. His mother's. His father's. The ghosts here didn't rattle chains or slam doors. They just lingered in the corners of photos, in the worn grooves on the linoleum floor. Brian stood for a while with his hand on the back of Jack's old recliner. The indent from his father's form was still there, like a fossil pressed into cushion. Eventually, he returned to the garage. The light was still on. The air smelled the same. But something in him had shifted. He reached for the cassette box, not to listen, but to hold it. Then he took out the first tape again. March 5, 1992. He held it up to the light. The reels inside gleamed faintly, plastic teeth catching the sun. He set it back down. That's when he noticed the envelope. Tucked underneath the felt lining. Almost hidden. Brian pried it loose, unfolded it with careful fingers. It was sealed in wax. Faded red. The kind his dad used to drip on envelopes for bills. He said it was more reliable than glue. Brian had rolled his eyes at it back then. Inside, a single sheet. Handwritten. Instructions for after. Brian sat on the work stool and began to read. If you're reading this, it means the tapes didn't scare you off. Good. That means I did something right. Or maybe just enough wrong to make you curious. This garage is yours now. I know you never said you wanted it. But I see how you touch the tools. How your hands remember even when your heart forgets. Don't sell the house until you're sure. Let it breathe. Let it settle. Places have memory. They hold more than dust. If you find the compass, keep it. It works. Always has. If you find the glove, take it with you. You'll know when it's time to pass it on. Brian swallowed hard. There's a safe in the floorboards beneath the back bench. You'll need the socket wrench with the green tape on the handle. Use it on the loose bolt near the leg. Turn it twice to the left. Then twice to the right. It'll lift. His heart thumped. A safe? He kept reading. Inside, there's a letter for your mother. Don't read it. Just give it to her. She'll know what it means. There's also a savings bond. Cash it when you're ready to start something. And there's a key. It opens the lockbox I left in the cabin in Michigan. You remember that place. You caught your first fish there. You cried when we let it go. I said it was too small, but really, I just didn't want to clean it. Brian laughed under his breath, the sound tight and wet. That cabin's yours now, too. It's not much. But it's yours. If you need to disappear for a while, go there. It won't ask questions. Then came the final lines. One last thing. Someday, when I'm more memory than man, tell someone about me. Tell the truth, not the good parts, not just the bad. Just the whole damn story. That way, I don't disappear. That way, the light stays on. Love. Dad. Brian stared at the page. It shook slightly in his hands. Then he folded it, slower this time, as if putting something away he'd need again soon. He crossed the garage floor, knelt beside the back bench. The bolt was there, painted with a dab of green tape, just like Jack said. He used the socket wrench, turned it twice left, twice right. A soft click. The floorboard lifted. And inside was the safe. He opened it. Everything was there. The envelope marked, "For Marianne." The bond. The key. And something else, a small black notebook, bound in leather. He opened it. Just inside the front cover. Things I meant to say. His throat closed. Page after page of handwritten notes. One-liners. Moments. Observations. Like he'd been keeping a record. Like he knew there were things he couldn't say out loud, so he captured them here. Brian didn't read it yet. He wasn't ready. He put it back gently. Closed the safe. Refastened the bolt. Then he stood. He spent the rest of the day in motion. He cleared out half the garage, organized what mattered, boxed what didn't. He found old Polaroids tucked into a bag of screws. Letters from Jack's mother, still bound with a rubber band so dry it cracked like brittle leaves. He found a Father's Day card he'd made in second grade, covered in motor oil thumbprints. By nightfall, the air in the garage had changed. It didn't feel like a tomb anymore. It felt like a chapter. A finished one. The house lights were off. The porch light glowed. And the garage, faithful as ever, hummed in quiet amber. Brian walked out to the driveway and sat on the hood of his rental car. He looked up. No stars tonight. Just cloud cover, thick and low. Still, he raised the compass in his hand. The needle spun. Settled. Pointed home. He didn't need to listen to the tapes again. But he would. Someday. When his hands forgot. When his voice cracked too easily. When his own kid asked, "What was he like?" And Brian would say, "Let me show you the garage." The next morning came slowly. Brian rose before the sun, not because he wanted to, but because something inside wouldn't let him sleep longer. The kind of restlessness that doesn't come from noise or caffeine, but from gravity. From knowing something's ending. The sky outside was still a soft gray when he pulled on his hoodie, stepped into his sneakers, and padded out into the garage barefoot. The concrete was cold, but not unpleasant. The light was still on. Buzzing. Faithful. He stood in the doorway for a long time, just breathing it in. This place, this cluttered, quiet cathedral of socket wrenches and rust, had spoken more truth to him in the last 2 days than years of therapy, lovers, or apologies ever could. He picked up the glove again. Pressed his nose into the leather. It still smelled like 1994. Like grass. Like youth. Like his father's silent pride. Then he looked at the compass. The needle still danced before settling north. Maybe it had never been about direction. Maybe it had always been about return. He packed a single duffel bag. Not because he planned to leave forever, but because staying too long would make things heavier. He left the glove on the bench. The compass, too. A promise to come back. A vow not to run this time. The shoebox of tapes? That came with him. He placed it carefully in the passenger seat of his car, seat-belted in like a fragile passenger. Then he walked inside the house one last time. In the hallway, he paused at the family photo, him at 15, awkward and angry, his mom smiling too hard, his dad off to the side, half-turned, eyes squinting like the sun had caught him mid-thought. Brian gently removed the frame from the wall, opened the back, and slid the letter, for Marianne, between the glass and the photo. He set it back on the wall. She'd find it. Eventually. When she was ready. And when she did, maybe she'd finally hear Jack say the things he never could. The drive to Michigan was 5 hours. 6 with traffic. Brian took the long way. Back roads. Small towns. Cornfields and forgotten motels. Roads his father must have driven once or twice, in his own restless youth before he settled into the rhythm of home, habit, and fatherhood. The tapes sat in the passenger seat, unmoving. He didn't play them. Didn't need to. Jack's voice was etched into him now, like grooves in vinyl. Still, at a gas station off Route 6, he caught himself looking at the car behind him in the mirror, half expecting to see that old Impala. It wasn't there. Of course it wasn't. But the feeling was. He reached the cabin near dusk. The gravel crackled under his tires. The lake, now half frozen at the edges, lay still in the dying light. The air smelled of pine and old wood. The porch sagged a little more than he remembered. But it was still standing. Still holding. He stepped out of the car and stretched, the cold air biting at his ribs. Then he walked up to the door. Same brass keyhole. Same tiny windscreen with the fish skeleton. The one Jack had said was too damn cute, but never took down. He unlocked the door. It stuck like it always did. Inside, the cabin was dark and musty. Dust hung in the air like memory. Brian didn't turn on the light right away. He just stood there, breathing. Feeling. Then he walked straight to the fireplace. Above it, behind the chipped wooden mantel, was a metal lockbox, just like Jack had said. He set it down on the table, took the key from the safe out of his pocket, and turned it slowly. Inside were 2 things. 1, a small wooden duck, carved by hand, painted with shaking fingers. On the bottom, in faded sharp, "For Brian, first catch, 1990. And beneath it, a bundle of pages. Unbound. Typed. The first page simply said, "Instructions for being a father." Brian blinked. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted the pages. Each one was short. A paragraph. A moment. A memory. Lessons his father had never spoken, but must have collected. He read. Teach them to hold a flashlight steady. Even when they're scared. Don't correct every mistake. Some of them are how we learn the shape of the world. Say sorry. Even if your own father never did. Leave a light on. Always. Brian kept reading. The last page was the shortest. Just 1 line. Love out loud, son. You already know how. He pressed the paper to his chest. Closed his eyes. And cried. That night, in the cabin, fire crackling low and soft, Brian set up the old tape deck Jack had left behind. He placed the first tape in. Press play. And listened again, not as a son waiting to be seen, but as a man preparing to carry something forward. Not the weight, but the light. Brian stayed in the cabin 3 days. He chopped wood, cooked eggs in a rusted skillet, listened to loons call across the lake, slept under wool blankets that still held the faint scent of cedar and dust. It wasn't peace, exactly, but it was a kind of settling. The silence didn't chase him here, it invited him in, asked nothing, held space. Each night, he played one tape. Not to revisit the words, but to honor the rhythm of them. To listen like you would to rain. Or the ticking of a clock you'd once hated and now missed when it stopped. On the third morning, he woke before the sun, heart still tight with something he couldn't name. He wrapped himself in a blanket, poured instant coffee into a chipped mug, and stepped out onto the porch. The lake was a sheet of dull silver. The world was quiet. And then, his breath caught. Because there, on the edge of the dock, was a boy. 6, maybe 7. Knees tucked to his chest. Hair sticking up in the back. Bare feet. It took Brian a moment to realize. The boy was him. Or something like him. Not a ghost. Not a vision. Just memory, made real by absence and time. Brian didn't speak. He walked slowly down to the dock and sat beside the boy without a word. Let the silence settle between them like an old dog laying down. They sat like that a long time. Then the boy said, "He ever teach you how to cast right?" Brian blinked. Swallowed. "No," he said quietly. "He always meant to. But we got busy." The boy nodded. "You gonna teach someone else?" Brian looked out over the lake. Took a long breath. "Yeah," he said. "Someday." The boy nodded again. Then stood. And walked slowly down the dock until the mist swallowed him whole. Brian didn't follow. Just sat. Just breathed. He left the cabin later that day, locking it carefully, like he'd been entrusted with something. The key went back into his pocket. The ducks sat on the dash. He didn't return straight to Indiana. He drove east, toward Cleveland, but took every back road he could. Through towns with names like Jasper and Bilic. He stopped at a roadside diner that still served meatloaf for breakfast. A waitress with a name tag that said Dolores filled his coffee 3 times without asking. He called his mom from the parking lot. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "Hey," she said softly. "You all right?" Brian looked out the windshield. The sky was blue. Too blue for what he felt. "I think I'm gonna keep the house," he said. "Fix it up a little. Keep the garage the way it is." There was a pause. Then, "I think he'd like that." He nodded. Then remembered she couldn't see him. "Yeah." Another pause. "I found the letter," she said. Brian closed his eyes. "I haven't read it yet," she added. "Take your time," he said. It's good. Your father was a complicated man." "Yeah," Brian said. "Turns out I am too." They stayed on the line a while longer. Didn't say much. Didn't need to. When they hung up, Brian just sat there, listening to the engine tick in the quiet. 2 weeks later, he was back in Indiana. The grass had gone wild in the front yard. He mowed it slowly, methodically, the way Jack used to. Front to back. Straight lines. No diagonal patterns or fancy crisscrossing. Just clean, practical rows. He put the glove in a shadow box and hung it above the workbench. He mounted the compass beside it. And he built a shelf, new wood sanded smooth, just for the cassette box. That was the first thing anyone saw when they stepped inside the garage now. A simple wooden box. A silent archive of a man who spoke in oil changes and light bulbs. A month passed. Then 2. And one day, a kid from the neighborhood wandered into the open garage. Brian was changing the oil on his mom's car. Sweat on his forehead, grease on his shirt. He looked up, wiping his hands on an old rag. "Hey," the kid said. "You Brian?" He nodded. "Yeah. You need something?" The kid shuffled. Looked at the floor. My dad said you know how to fix bikes. Brian paused, tilted his head. Your dad sent you? The boy nodded. Said you were like your old man? Said that meant something. Brian didn't know how to respond to that. Not for a long moment. Then he said, Bring it by. We'll take a look. The kid grinned. Thanks, Mr. Morgan, Brian said. Call me that until we break something together. The boy laughed and ran off down the street. Brian turned back to the car. And for the first time since the funeral, he reached for a socket wrench with ease. That night, he stood in the garage, fingers tracing the cassette box. He didn't need to play them anymore. He remembered. Every word. Every breath. Every silence. He looked at the photo of his younger self, held up a spark plug like it was a trophy. Then he flipped the light switch off. The garage went dark. Except for the one bulb above the door. The one Jack had always left on. The one Brian never would turn off. The first snowfall came early that year. Not heavy. Just enough to dust the rooftops and sugar the brown lawns. Brian stood at the front window of the house, coffee in hand, watching the flakes drift sideways through the yellow light of the street lamp. It was the first winter without Jack. And yet, the man felt more present than ever. Brian could still feel the shape of his voice, could hear it in the way he spoke to the neighbors now, slower, more deliberate. He felt it in his knuckles when he gripped a wrench. In his spine when he bent to check tire pressure. In the silence between questions, when the answer didn't need to be said aloud. The garage light glowed through the side window, a beacon in the dark. He kept it on always now, not out of ritual, but purpose. An invitation. A week before Christmas, his mom came home. She stood at the threshold of the garage, hands tucked into her coat sleeves, breath visible in the cold. Brian didn't say anything. Just handed her the old stool. She sat. Looked around slowly. Her eyes scanned every peg, every smudge, every carefully labeled drawer. She smiled, just a little. He'd be furious you reorganized his drill bits. Brian laughed. I left the weird tin of screws untouched. Didn't want to invoke his ghost. They sat in silence. Then she reached over and squeezed his hand. I read the letter. Brian nodded. He wrote about the miscarriage, she said quietly. About how he built those shelves while I was crying on the bathroom floor. He told me too, Brian said. On the tapes. She looked over at him, her eyes shining. Tapes? He paused. Then stood, walked to the shelf, and brought over the shoebox. She opened it slowly. Her hand shook as she lifted one. She held it to her chest, as if she could feel Jack's heartbeat in the plastic. I'll wait, she said. You don't have to be here when I listen. You won't be alone, Brian said gently. He made sure of that. The following spring, Brian opened the garage to the neighborhood. Officially. A sign out front, hand-painted. Morgan's Small Repairs. Free for kids. Donations accepted. He fixed bikes. Tightened cabinet doors. Sharpened lawnmower blades. He didn't charge much. Sometimes nothing at all. When people asked why he did it, he'd shrug and say, Somebody left the light on for me once. Figured I'd return the favor. They always nodded, even if they didn't understand. One day, a woman came in with her son. The boy had a busted scooter. Brake cable snapped. Wheels wobbled like loose teeth. Brian knelt down beside him, holding the broken part gently between his fingers. Ever fix one of these before? He asked. The kid shook his head. Shy. Wanna learn? The boy looked up. Then nodded. Brian handed him a screwdriver. And said the words Jack had never found, but had always meant. I've got time. Later that night, after the garage was swept and the tools returned to their hooks, Brian stood with the final cassette in his hand. He hadn't played it yet. Hadn't needed to. But now, something in him said it was time. He pressed it into the player. Sat on the stool. Turned the volume up. Click. Silence. Then Jack's voice, soft and slow, like wind against old wood. If this is the last tape, and I think it might be, I want to leave you with one final thing. A truth I didn't learn until it was too late to use, but not too late to share. A long pause. You don't have to become me. You never did. You only had to know I loved you. Another breath. And you don't have to carry me. Just remember the good parts. The useful ones. The parts that help you be better. The tape warbled slightly, like the old reels were giving out. Forgive me for the silence. Forgive me for the things I said in oil changes instead of words. Brian closed his eyes. He could see his father now, not as the stern man in the garage, but as the voice behind the curtain, revealing himself one word at a time. I hope the light stays on. Even after I'm gone. That's all I ever wanted. Click. End of tape. End of story. Summer came. Then fall. Brian kept the garage open. He never touched the cassette box again. But he never moved it either. Kids came and went. Neighbors started calling him Jack's boy. Again. And when someone asked if he ever felt like his father was still with him, Brian just nodded toward the single, humming light overhead. Still amber. Still buzzing. Still on. Always.